I think I'm live. I find myself wanting to do a little doodle-doo-doo, doodle-doo-doo, like I've seen Coach Colin do. See if my sound is active. Whew. I bought this equipment to do something pretty innocuous, teach people how to speak Latin. I found that it really fixes English. It's very clear, but then the world changed. A guy I really didn't know, Charlie Kirk, was killed live. That'll probably be cut out, but a gentleman I really didn't know was I know I can just cut this out, so it doesn't matter. So I'm trying to reorient. Now, I planned on making those Latin videos, and then I heard that a gentleman I really didn't know had been killed, and I had taken in a dear friend of his, Candace Owens. I've thoroughly enjoyed her reporting around Brigitte Macron. Likewise, I think, well, I've come to enjoy her journalism, I'll put it that way. So in that context, I started taking in this occurrence in our world, and I encountered this video. And like I said, I was going to podcast about Latin. I happen to read the Bible daily, not because I'm religious, because I speak classical Latin and it's very accessible. It's pretty straightforward, but the English does not match the Latin. So I had already had some misgivings with what I was reading in the Bible and how it was being construed. Now that I see the Bible being used as a weapon, as a tool in so many arenas, I think it's important for us to know what the Bible says. So I saw this interview with Erica Kirk on Faulkner. She references Nehemiah 6. I'm going to play just like a minute of that, and then we'll get into Nehemiah. Now, imagine your spouse, your betrothed, your oath bound has just been killed, and you go on TV. Would you reference Benedict Arnold, which is maybe a better reference than I thought at first? What about a Quisling, if you know Nordic or Nazi history? Well, Nehemiah's story is interesting. Let's put it that way. Let's see this clip of Erica and I think it's from the 5, Outnumbered. I'm sorry, it's from Outnumbered. And then we'll dig into Nehemiah. Oh, I had to start my video over and I lost my place. Here we go.
One thing.
What are they taking from you right now?
Nothing. But I will tell you what they are doing. It reminds me so much of chapter 6 in the book of Nehemiah. He is building a wall, and the townspeople are at the base of that hill saying, Nehemiah, calling him all these names, saying all these things, come on down. Every single time he had the same message 4 times in a row. I cannot come down. I am busy building. That is how I feel. I do not have time to address the noise. My silence does not mean that I am complacent. My silence does not mean that somehow Turning Point USA and all of the handpicked staff that loved my husband and my husband loved them is somehow in on it. We are busy building. And you know what I thought? I thought these people are human. We are all grieving in our own way. And they are trying to find the answer to something that happened that was so evil. They are trying so hard. And I get that. We're doing the same. Anytime we...
That's probably enough of that. We've heard how they are not, in fact, passing on tips, things like that. But I did just hear a video where she said she built with a hammer in one hand and a sword in the other. So that is certainly a good introduction, we'll say, to Nehemiah. Now, when I read the Bible, I try not to start in the middle. Chapter 6 is like dead in the middle of Nehemiah. I find that context is very important. Sometimes on a page, it'll say, no matter what you do, don't act like this. And then it'll give a page and then they quote that next page. That's not really taking the meaning of the Bible accurately. But the mistranslating goes further than that. So Nehemiah, we're going to start with chapter 1. And Nehemiah tells us that it's the 20th year. He doesn't say the 20th year of what. He says the month is Kasleu or Kislev. When I look at the Jewish calendar from the biblical period, it's the 9th month. We're talking the 4th of December to the 4th of November to the 3rd of December. Now, when we go to chapter 2, it's going to be Nisan. And he's going to say it's the 20th year in the reign of Artaxerxes. Now, he does not say in the reign of in the chapter 1. So we'll talk about that time but let's focus on the month for the moment. Nisan during the biblical period was the first month of the year. So if the 20th year is in fact the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes, it's 6 months. I'm sorry, 8 months after he goes and sees the king. I think, however, it's the 20th year since Artaxerxes gives him the letters. And I think there's a lot of evidence for that. So it's in fact 20 years and 8 months after chapter 2. So let's look at chapter 1, and then we'll look at his confession, his story, because what he'll tell us in chapter 1 is what he did in this book was not good, and he is oh so sorry and is asking for forgiveness. So when the book starts, we find him at the military camp of Sussis. They say castle, but Castro is a military camp. Now, it may be fortified with stones, but it is a military camp. Sussis is a bracketed name. Now, what do I mean by bracketed? You may wonder, where do names come from? It depends on whether they're eponyms, if they're the names we give ourselves, or if they're names that others give us. For example, we don't really think about it, but when people write history, they decide how to name us. So if you've heard of Alexander the Great, he was known as the son of Philip, maybe a bastard son, maybe a son from a former consort. But Philip is known as being a lover of horses. Well, the name Philip means lover of horses. He loved to ride horses and he loved the knights. All of these things are conjoined in one. So was he known as Philip of Macedon while he lived? I don't know. But I know that there was a guy who was a lover of horses in Macedonia who was instrumental to the start of Alexander the Great. So we need to look beyond the perhaps codification of the history to the story that it's communicating to us. So here we see in Sussis Castro. Well, Sussis, sus means pig. I'm going to release a video, Canticum Canticorum, retranslated as Song of Songs. I would argue that it's the crow of the crows, the crow of the rooks, rooks being these guarded towers. Sus pig, is gives us the verb to go. So this is to go, you go pig, or you the pig go. So this may be a name from an outgroup being put onto a camp. That's what we call them because that's how they're acting. I didn't understand the reference to pig until I made the video and translated Canticum Canticorum. There we see the derivation of the word paradisus. That's too much of a tangent for now, but I will release that video if I haven't already. So Nehemiah's in this rough, raucous camp where there is wine, where there is booze. Now, Roman camps did not have booze and wine. They were highly ordered and disciplined camps. They brought vinegar with them, not wine. They may have allowed baggage trains with bread and beer in them, but those would have been outside the walls of the camp, not inside. So there was an ordered space and a disordered space, as you would say. Now, while he's in this military camp, he meets men from Judah and he asks about the Jews who had remained and overcome captivity. He also asked about Jerusalem herself. Now, I'm going to leave the derivation of that word Jerusalem for now because I want to move forward in the Nehemiah story. I brought up this part to look at the reply. The men explained that they were deserted or forsaken from captivity, not that they overcame it. When we're going to see Nehemiah sieges Jerusalem, revolts against his king, and the people who revolted with him were taken into captivity. And the ones who remained, they didn't remain because they were able to escape or fight back. Instead, they were told they weren't wanted in captivity. No, you go out into the wild and fend for yourself. We're not bringing you in even as a captive, not even in like nasty work, like grain field work or mining work, stuff you see late in the Roman Empire when it's already neocon empire after the Republic is clearly waning, if not dead. People might have been rejected for temperament, age, physical condition. If as sad as captive slavery is, and it is horrific, it is not servus, but captivity slavery is horrific. I can't imagine how awful it is to be rejected from it. If you've never seen Apocalypto, it's portrayed extremely well. Based on the reference to Artaxerxes, this would either be 445 BC or 384 BC. I think it's 445 BC. Either way, the Achaemenids are in control of this area. So this is 480 BC. We see they had all of Egypt, most of the coast of the Saudi Peninsula, all the Sinai, all of the Levant, Turkey, into Greece. The Peloponnese, the Spartans, remember, were the ones fighting back. Now, if we look at this map, this is 400. So this would be halfway between the 445 that Artaxerxes I would give us and the 384, well, a little more than halfway, the 384 of Artaxerxes II, his son. And look, they still held Jerusalem at that point. And notice there's Gaza on that map. Just saying. And then we get to this map, which is 350. So 350 would be 34 years after Artaxerxes II. And you can see they've lost Egypt, as in the 400 map, but they still hold all of the Levant. So we're going to see that this is the 20th year since he rebels against his king, in which case we're looking at 425 BC for chapter 1 and 445 BC for chapter 2. They reply, they are cast down, humbled, in ruin. They're in disgrace, shame, scandal. The walls been burned, and the gates, combustai sunt igni. Now, it's interesting. It translates that as burnt with fire. Now, the combustai on its own means burnt with fire. Why were we adding the igni? By adding the igni, what we're saying is there's another reason. We need that more specific meaning of combustai that makes us want to add with fire. So we know that we are not combustai on account of the fire. Probably that meaning with fire came later from an understanding, but originally combustai comes from bustum, the grave or the place where a cremation occurs. Now, in Roman society and Western colonial societies, they didn't, colonial meaning millennia ago, not recent colonialism. These societies where they would expand out and build a new town and develop a new interest in a place that didn't have one, they would build city walls for protection. And then outside the city walls, there would be catacombs for the dead. You can't bury your dead in the city wall. That could get fetid. And you want high ground. So if there's an Acropolis, you're not only building city walls, you're building on top of the Acropolis and building city walls. Then a town may form down around as you feel protected, as you establish good boundaries, good neighbors. But if pirates come and if a boat lands, you can all run up to the protected position. This is what we see at the Capitoline Hill in Rome, the Acropolis in Corinth, in Athens, in Thebes. These were the defining geographical elements that allowed these societies to maintain a defensive position. It's clear that they did not want war. They wanted defense, and they were keeping someone out. And if we look at Spartan society, it's the Helots. And if we look at Athenian society, we see they let in the sailors. Now, the combustai would have been these sepulchres, these graves and catacombs outside the city. The ancients believed that the soul, the animating force, could hold on to that body. And so you would store the body outside the city walls. You would visit it. You would speak to it and say how you were doing. Now, we think of that as praying or thinking of the body as alive. In a practical way, it was a way for us to clarify our thoughts, speak our conscience, make a plan. When I think of my grandfather, I think of wanting to make him proud. That's what they were experiencing. They were asking for guidance. Grandfather, I know you were wise. How should I act now? Now, in the ancient belief, this inner animus, this inner anima, was a collective force of electric will that held itself together. They believed that if it stayed with the body, it may provide protection to the city. The sheer force of the will of the people, of the bodies that remained, would help solidify the city walls. So when we see combustai sunt igni, I think the catacombs were burnt with fire. When they built the city, when they burnt the city walls, when they attacked the city walls, when they broke the siege, it burned the bodies. That's how the king got the city back. And it makes you wonder, since we're going to see Nehemiah talk so much about preserving the bodies outside the city walls, if at the end of the day it wasn't the technique that the king used to bust the siege after 12 years, if he didn't in fact burn the catacombs to get the people out of the city. Now, let's talk about what Nehemiah did. So after he hears that the catacombs have been burned, the walls are down, he says, after weeping and rioting, sitting down, weeping and rioting for days, he prays and confesses the sins of the sons of Israel. That's the section here. He said they use the force of God in sin. He's going to evoke that he has the hand of God, manos dei. We'll look at that in a minute. He says they were seduced by vanity. Is that what Erica's telling us too? He also asked to repent and live right. And then he proceeds to ask to be given the land, even though they have acted so abhorrently. At the end, he asks for mercy and finishes with the line, I was the cupbearer for the king. So that certainly sounds to me like I've recognized I did wrong, I'm repenting, and here are the crimes I just told you I would tell you about. I'm confessing the crimes of the sins of Israel that I now need to ask for forgiveness for. Now, I think it's in Sapientia. I'm not sure. I've been working on a few translations for videos, but there's one part where they reference the words of Moses and they say, remember you told us don't go make treaties with the Canaanians, the Con-Aeneas, those with Aeneas, Dido's people, the Canaanites. That's how they were named, Con-Aeneas, with Aeneas. That's another video. Don't go making treaties with the Canaanites. But that idiom, don't go making treaties, means don't go stirring shit. Don't bring foetorus, stench, shit, wickedness. Did it come to mean make treaties? Yes. Both are true. When do you have to make a treaty? When you have gone and stirred shit somewhere and you have to make a confession like this. It wasn't saying don't go get along. It was saying exactly the opposite. Don't act in a way that makes you need to make a treaty. The line continues on by saying don't touch their sepulchres. Don't touch their graves. Live amongst them and treat them right. Don't make treaties. Don't stir shit. And you'll be fine. But the message they took away was don't go making treaties with people. That was not what was intended. So he says, I was the king's cupbearer. Now, that brings us to Nehemiah 2. Nehemiah 2 says this is, again, the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes. So if we're adding 20 since the start of the siege, that first one would be the 40th year of Artaxerxes. And I would have to look up to see if number 2 had taken over then. And I'm not going to do that now. But that's the year BC we're talking about. Now they reference to him. I'm going to go back to that other page, but I'm not going to switch the tab for the moment. They go back to that other tab for Pinkerna. That's the word they used for cupbearer. Now, oikonos is the one in Greek, and that overlaps with eunuch. But Pinkerna is interesting because it alludes to pinecone, the Thyrsus, Dionysus. So he's the wine bearer is the reference. I think we're going to see, so that Thyrsus is used to mix up the grapes, get the yeast all in there. That pine cone will hold on to last year's yeast. It's not as potent as the current year, but if you get a bad year of yeast, having that accumulated over time yeast helps build it. I think there were other uses of the thyrsus, but I'm going to hold that for another day. So turning to chapter 2, here we have him in the presence of Artaxerxes II and his wife. He's bearing the cup to the king. It says that he lifts it up to him. That's not what it's saying. It's saying he lightens it. This is a king who does not drink full wine. He waters his wine like a Roman does. So even though he drinks wine, he's working to be reserved, to not be the image that we have of Xerxes when he's fighting Leonidas in the 300. So he goes before the king, he's serving him, and the king says, why does your face look so unhappy? That word, however, can also mean disagreeable or foul offensive. Now, I think part of the move to obscure the meaning is to make it look like chapter 1 predates chapter 2. And to have it, well, of course he's sorrowful. He just found out that all the sepulchres have been messed up. But I really do not think that's the case. I don't see how you can read chapter 1 that way. He's clearly confessing their sins from 20 years ago. When I should not see you sick, it's not without cause, in deceit, in error. Well, we're going to find out it is actually in deceit. Or even if the emotion's not in deceit, what he's going to say on account of it is. But I do not know what evil is in your heart, and I have feared vigorously beyond measure. And I said to the king, live forever. He scared the king to the point that he assured him he did not intend him evil. That does not sound sorrowful to me. That sounds foul, offensive, disagreeable to me. By what account should my face not grieve? Because the nation, the home of the burial chambers of my father, has been abandoned. So he's upset. I'm living in this other world. I've got all this power, this position. I'm in your family. And yet the graves of my fathers are there with no protection by my people. And its gates have been cremated with bodies with fire. Now, the same verbiage is used. So did the Persians burn the sepulchres originally when they took over Jerusalem? And he's bewailing that. Would he bring it up to the king that way? Has Jerusalem been attacked by someone else? I'm not clear, but the king agrees with him. You're right. We should rebuild those. He says, I've prayed to the God of the sky. Again, they're kind of making us think that they're talking about chapter 1, but this is a different set of prayers. And he says, if you think it's a good idea, maybe I could go and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. The queen's sitting there. He's talking to both of them. The king agrees. He says, well, if you think that's a good idea, why don't you write me letters? Write me letters to the generals across the River Jordan. Tell them I'm going to rebuild those walls for you. Write me another letter to the watcher of your royal forest, all of the great timber that I can use to rebuild the walls. Let him know I'm for you. The king's like, well, that's a good idea. I could do that. And so what does the king do? The king writes these letters, and he gives the letters and a good word. You can see him out there putting Nehemiah onto his horse or his ass. He kind of lets out that he rides a beast of burden instead of a horse, which I find interesting. I think I would put him on a donkey. But he's bringing with him the knights of the king. He's bringing with him the manos. Now, again, they translate this as hand, but manos is the wing of an army. It's specifically the infantry wing of an army. It comes to mean a band of violent men. So the king brings him out with a band, a wing of an army, maybe the king's guard. And he says to them, this guy, he's acting on my behalf. These are my letters. He's got my plan. Yep. No matter what he says, right? This is my guy. And then he shows them, look, this is the hand of God. Here's the cup. He's got the wine cup. And they send them off. This is the guy who's going to rebel against the king. They arrived at the generals of the region across the Jordan. And it gives them the letters. And he shows them the people with him. He says, the king sent me here with the chiefs of the military, the princeps, the knights, and Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobias, the Sarawis, the servant, the watcher. We'll talk more about them in a moment. They were saddened with great torment because somebody arrived, a man arrived, seeking the good fortune of the sons of Israel. They have not even heard that he's rebelling. He's just doing the king's work at this point, and they're already scared. He arrived in Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem. When I first encountered this word, I saw Eru, which resolves back to a ruler of Syracuse, of Sicily. And it means holy or royal or noble. And then the Salem, salis is salt. So when I first saw that, I was saying, oh, holy salt. And that made me think of Egypt, right? That's the city of holy salt. We have natron salt there. They used it for their mummies. When you look at the chemical composition, it looks like they used it to make quick breads, which until they discovered yeast, which that's a lot of what the Bible's about, is humans starting to create yeast themselves, not just harvest yeast externally and learn to use that yeast. So that's one derivation. But when you look at Jerusalem and you have that word manos in mind, the wing of an army, alem, so erus means out of the country. An erus was a master, like the head of a house, a dominus, domina, dominus, the mistress and master, the heads of the house, the father, the mother, all same words for that same role. So erus, out of the country. And then that would leave us with alem instead of salem, salt. Again, Romans like rebracketing. So alem might be the wing of knights. Alai is wing of birds, which then came to mean a wing of knights of an army. So he sent him a guard of infantry and a guard of knights, perhaps. But we're talking about the derivation of the name at this point. So Erus, country, rural, alem, knights. Now that em is a shift from ala alai, first declension. But we often see when a word takes its leap from a first or second declension noun or early third and has a new military meaning, it takes a third declension ending, or it adds an extra syllable and adds a third declension ending. Equus, equi, horse, originally the horse, nay, and the man who was with it. So when knights lived outside the city, the time of Gorgia, Georgia, the Spartans, they would have referred to the men outside the city as equi, horses, knights. But when the knights came into the society, now we're talking about Roman society, They became equitis, third declension knights. Equites plural, the knights. So he arrives in Jerusalem, and he was there for 3 days, living in subterfuge for 3 days. Every night he would go out, sneak out at night with no word to the people he stayed with. I and a few men with me, and I did not betray to anyone. I did not announce, proclaim to anyone what God had given in my heart. So now he's telling God, look, I know I took this manos into the city every night with me, and we scoped it out. We figured out how we were going to siege it, but they didn't know. They still thought we were doing the work of the king. Now, I think this requires a bit of the sniff test. Do you believe that the knights would believe they were doing the work of the king, skulking around at night, checking out the city? I did not betray, announce, proclaim to anyone what God had given in my heart to do, so that I would do it, make it, do it in Jerusalem. I had no baggage train with me except the animal on which I was sitting. This is the part where I say that he's announcing that he just has the wing of an army and some knights, a wing of knights out of the army maybe, and not a full military force. Otherwise, they'd need a baggage train. They'd need provisions for the army. So he's come into the city with the largest force he can come into it with, without bringing an army of force in. He's the Trojan horse, right? And I marched out through the valley gate. So he's on the ass, and he's got his small band with him at night. So he's doing it under dark of night. He went through the valley gate before the spring of the dragon and toward Shit Gate. And I was considering the squandered, demolished, ruined walls of Jerusalem and its gates consumed by fire. Now notice here, it says the gates. It doesn't give that reference of graves. And I crossed over to the gate of the spring, also towards the aqueduct of the king. What's the aqueduct? That's the pure drinking water source of this town. This is what they're drinking out of, and he's stomping up through it. There was not a place for the beast of burden that I could use so that he could cross it. So I climbed up through the torrent of water by night, so I could survey the wall, and having returned, I arrived at the valley gate and returned to the house. The magistrates, now magistrates is derived from like ship captain. These are not the optimates, the fathers, the literal fathers, the citizens who lead houses with mothers. These are the detached men. Were not knowing where I had gone away or what I might do. But also the Jews, the priests, the optimates, the magistrates, the others who did the work of building the walls, right up until it was time for me to say this. I had betrayed nothing, revealed nothing, announced nothing publicly. I'm the only one who bears the planning guilt. That's what he's saying. And Erica's putting herself in an analogy to that? How does that make sense? I had betrayed nothing. And I said to them, you know the ruin, the casting down, the throwing, that we had been struck, dashed, prostrated, humbled, overthrown, in which we are, because Jerusalem has been abandoned and its gates have been consumed by fire. abandoned. It's a going concern. Did you hear all the people that are there? Magistrates, priests, optimates. There's Jews there. It hasn't been abandoned. And its gates have been consumed by fire. Come and let us build the walls, and let us not be additionally reproached, additionally shamed, scandaled, disgraced. Let us not be beyond reproach. Is he asking to be struck down? Or is he saying, entitle us to our destruction that we will rot? We know because of book 1 that he's been humbled since then, that they are not successful. I showed them the army of God was with me. Now remember, they say hand, we know wing of an army. He probably showed them both. He probably showed them, hey, here's my men, and I have the cup, the wine. He calls for them to rise up and rebuild the city. These people rebuked, 3 people rebuked Nehemiah, chastising him for rebelling against the king. He's the cupbearer. He's pledged loyalty. He came to Jerusalem with letters from the king. He had the king's chief of strategies, the principes, the knights, Sanballat. Remember him and Tobias? They knew 3 days ago they were worried. Sanballat, a Horonite, called him out. Now, what's a Horonite? I had to look it up. He was from Huwara in the West Bank. He was a Palestinian. A Sarwas Tobias. Now, there's been a modern shift to take this word as slave, and that is just not true. When you look at the root, it is the command, Serwa, watch, pay attention. They had brought people into their society who were having trouble getting everything, but they wanted to bring them in. They wanted to help the little brothers come along. So they told them, watch, pay attention, learn, we'll teach you. And then the knights eventually were invited in with full privileges, perhaps to Rome's decline. But what was their choice at that point? They had a population problem. We see it in the history of Sparta, also the history of Rome, that they were having a birthing crisis. They likely only could have babies once a year. All their holidays, it looks like they went with the sun. Those who consume bread went with the moon, so they could have a baby every month. That gives quite a genetic advantage. So eventually the Romans became muliers, soften women, so that they could become pregnant more reliably. But the servus, servant, it's somebody you bring into your family that you trust. They're sleeping in your house. Now, there were people we did not trust. They were entered the house through the ostium, the mouth door. People that you fed because they were hungry. You traded labor for that shelter, that food, but they did not have an entrance into the main house. You did not trust them. Talk more about ostiums in another video. So the servus is signed on to a family. When in ancient society, up until pretty recently, to spend the night in the city, in the town, you needed to be a citizen or you needed to have a pass. And your pass was the family you were signed on to. So you could sign on to an optimate family if they trusted you. You became a part of their family. You pledged your loyalty, like Nehemiah had pledged his loyalty to the king. He was in the king's household. That's who he pledged his loyalty to. Some Serwi had their own families, own houses, own Serwi. It was common in Roman society for the cook to be a servus, a male servant, who would have his own domus or apartment in the city, where he had rooms enough to have a wife kids and Serwi of his own. So he could pledge for people to come in the city, just like he needed a pledge. He needed the help of his pledge, but that's the way it worked. That's the way you brought people into society who agreed to live to a certain standard of living. They were not captivi. Captivi slavery is disgusting. In Rome, when they became neocons, they worked in the mines down in the ground till they died. They worked in industrial farms in southern Italy, Sicily, Naples. When Cicero visited the farms, he was horrified. They didn't have that kind of slavery in Rome. He hadn't seen that kind of slavery. It's clear from his descriptions. We need to be clear about who was doing what to whom and what guilt needs to be borne. And we need to remember who's enslaving whom today, right? What blood guilt is there? But I think that's another book. But I think it's important to remember that the message is we don't bear the guilt of our forefathers, but neither do we have the promises, right? The promise today is we have free will and we will be judged by our actions, not the actions of our forebears. We see clearly that Rome brought servi into the optimate class. Their notion of bringing people into society was to help them learn to run a house on their own, get into a house on their own, and eventually to get citizenship. These are the men who wear the pelisses, the freed caps. So the freemen's caps, what were they showing? That's another video too. But we know that optimates promoted servi to full optimate status because there are optimate names: Servius, son of the servant; Servilia, daughter of the servant, little daughter of the servant; Servilius, etc. The father and mother of a household were citizens, but they invited the people into the home. They traded labor and loyalty for shelter, food, and often money, perhaps usually money. The servi with skills, again like the cook, would work as servi until they could become citizens. The third person who called out Nehemiah was Gassem, the Arab. Now remember, we're under Persian leadership right now. So we have a Palestinian, an Arab, and a watcher, a Serwis, all calling him out for rebellion against the king. These are the people representing the peoples of this nation. Remember, Jerusalem is, I thought I was reading for him again. Remember, Jerusalem's under Persian rule, and that would be modern day Iran. The Jews of Jerusalem had celebrated Cyrus the Great for liberating Jerusalem from Babylonian rule since 539 BC. So 100 years they've been living, hopefully peaceably, mostly peaceably, under Achaemenid rule. The Jews lived an assimilated life. Nehemiah was a trusted member of the king's household. He was the cupbearer. Evidence points to his power, his trusted position. Now, who is this Artaxerxes? He's the son of the Xerxes that went against Leonidas in the Brave 300. Now, some people argue it could be Artaxerxes II. The convention of including the number while the person living existed for a long time. Like Elizabeth II was known as Elizabeth II, her whole queenship reigning. I think they'd have included second if it was second. Even if it is Artaxerxes II, the time period looks similar. We already looked at that. So Xerxes is his dad. Xerxes' father is Darius the Great, and Darius is the grandson of Cyrus the Great. So Cyrus the Great is the liberator. We now have the great-great-grandson who has allowed a liberated people to live, and he's going to stab him in the back. He's not going to kill him, but he is going to rebel against him and be a traitor and take over the city of Jerusalem for 12 years. It takes another 8 before Nehemiah comes to seek penance. Now, Nehemiah was not the first cupbearer to betray a king of the Achaemenid Empire. As it turns out, Artabanus, now Darius's brother is named Artabanus, but the story goes a different Artabanus conspired with the cupbearer or eunuch of Darius to kill him. First, it looks like they killed him and then blamed Xerxes and then killed Xerxes, or vice versa. But we already see a willingness to betray someone to whom you are oath bound. Now, that word cupbearer, we talked about pinkerna, pine, wine. It also looks like the root eunuch. And it's known that early scribes were known to gloss eunuchus as oinicus, just to change it to cupbearer. The cupbearer was likely also a eunuch, so both statements were true. Now, when we look at that word eunuch, we think someone who's been castrated, but we have another word for that. We have castrati. There's also eunuchs who are eunuchs by full removal. There's a different word for that. So we have 3 words. So the question is whether eunuch is a general word that means both castrati and full removal, or if eunuch had an earlier meaning and then castrati and that other word came to be after that. So having read old Aristophanes, some other ancient writers with commentary coming out of the 12, 13, 14, 1500s, some in the 1700s, you see notes that allude to the fact that eunuchos may have originally been a homosexual. And the reason that they could be trusted in a harem was not that they had been castrated, but that they were gay. Now, over time, they figured out that just because they couldn't fornicate didn't mean that they couldn't cause trouble being in the harem. So perhaps that's when the castrati came to be. So we see that as an overlap of eunuchos and oinikos. But there's another overlap there. The king, when he brings in that cupbearer, he needs the cupbearer to be loyal to his family. The cupbearer can't be loyal to his own legacy. So by choosing someone who is not going to have children because they're gay, or because their testicles have been removed, you hope to further bond the loyalty of them to you. That's the thinking. I'm not saying I'm in favor. I'm talking about how we ended up here. The king needs a loyal man, and as soon as that man has sons, he worries that his sons will take precedence over the king's sons. So we see that overlap. We also see this artificial family. So the king is trying to root the eunuch in a real family, a statist family, which we can argue about statism entirely in a different video. But this notion of a detached family really comes out of the deep-hulled boats that we call galleys, biremes, triremes, quinquiremes. It's the first place where we had a group of men that had moved off of that little boat, that fishing boat that feeds the mind with good things, good vitamin E, good nutrition, being out on the water, to being merchant ships. So now we're dealing heavily in wine. We're transporting wine. The addition of oil likely made it easier to maintain it as wine and not have it go to vinegar. We see that reference in Circe and Odysseus's story, that the sailors were turned into pigs, where initially they would go out and either trade for goods or pillage for goods, and they would bring it back to the society. We see this in Crete. And they would look for, in Portugal, and the sailors later on, they come home and they have a family, and they look for that reassurance that they're good men, that they've done a good thing. But when you go from trading or fighting a noble war, maybe, to being a pirate, maybe you don't feel so good about yourself anymore. And those people became more loyal to the boat than to the town they were from. This was our first instance of a detached family. And that ship captain boat, that magister, is the root of our word teacher, another potential path for artificial families, and magistrate, which is the artificial family of the town, separate from the families. Now back to Nehemiah. Not too much of a tangent. So his great work was to rebel against the king, modern Iran, then it was Persia. His goodwill, he stole his money, his resources, he used his goodwill, he twisted his words in the furtherance of his plan. He showed the letters. He said, look to the Horonite, Sanballat, Tobias, Gossam. He said, look, I got the letters. I'm doing this for the king. All the way to the end. And then he takes his city hostage. He's supposed to be the governor there. He's supposed to be there on behalf of the king. And instead, he revolts. Now, book 3 details each family who acted against their home. Now, remember, if they're Serwi, they're loyal bound to a home. They rebel against their homes. They build walls, walling them in, putting up valve doors, bars, and locks. So they have blocked people into their homes. Each man who walled a tower or gate, he lists. So they rebel against their homes. People come in, perhaps they're part of the Manos. You can see in book 3, each man and his sons who put an inner wall inside the city of Jerusalem. So they're besieging the inside people. They've trapped them inside. They're holding them hostage, while fortifying the outer gates from potential invasion by the king to reclaim it. Now, when they start, people are mocking them. Nobody's really listening to Sanballat or Tobias or what was his name? Gossam for the first few days. And then all of a sudden, they're shutting the gates. He's not just building. They have taken it over. Having read chapter 1, it is clearly Nehemiah's confession of their sins. He held the people and the grain hostage. By Nehemiah 4, he's manned the walls with archers. They make a big deal about the fact that he's exchanging letters with Sanballat and Tobias, but you have to communicate. Those people in there are held hostage. As the rural leaders, the regional generals, come to liberate the town. So now How are you going to liberate the town? How are you going to get the people out? How are you going to save the people? Nehemiah demands that the nobles give him grain, that they feed him. So they offer to sell it to him. They say, you don't have to take us hostage. We'll sell you grain. And when he has no money, they offer to lend him the money. They say, why don't you mortgage your farm? He says, I don't have any land. I'm still a serwus. And they say, we'll lend you money. You know what affronts him? Nehemiah 5. Nehemiah 5. This is the big one. Nehemiah 7 and 8. The nobles say that they will lend him money, but they charge interest. Now, everything else here looks Roman. I know Jerome wrote it in Latin context, but when you look at how Artaxerxes dealt with Themistocles, who had fallen out with Athens, he restored Ionian cities to his rule as a client king governor. He clearly is working to act in a Western style and maintain order within this Persica world. Given that, I would say it's simple interest. Now, today we're charged usurious compound interest. Nehemiah is offended. Do you charge your brother's interest? So brothers, is he talking that he has a familial relationship? No. Here we're seeing the collective use of the noun. The fathers of the town are the optimates. They're the citizen men who run households with women who are also optimates, and they run the house together. Roman optimate relationships were confratione, joined in common purpose. The brothers are people who are not married and or who are signed on to another house. So within the house, they would be called the brothers. They may be serwi. Brothers may be a step up in the society, a signed on serwi in Roman society. But Nehemiah is outing here that he is definitely a brother and he's part of the king's household. But look at line 9. The nobles affirm, yeah, we do charge brothers in our household interest. We don't lend people without property interest. They didn't say anything about whether they charge optimates interest. Optimates were banned from borrowing money, at least originally. So if they're not charged interest, that's why they don't have the option of borrowing money. But they can lend money, but they charge interest. They charge simple interest. They charge interest on the amount lent, not the time it takes you to pay it back. This infuriates Nehemiah. How can you not be scared of us? Don't you see we're empowered by this cup, this yeast? I have the hand of God. I have this violent group of men with me at my side. Then he goes on to claim that they've lent money and not been repaid, so you should just give us your grain. Now, he does not say they've lent money to him, to the people they're besieging. It's a weird assertion. It's like, generally, we've lent money to others, so you should lend money. You should give us the grain, right? Like, he doesn't even want the loan with no interest, but the interest just torques him off, which when I heard Candace Owens talk about Dave Rubin, I just laughed so hard because it's the Nehemiah story. So now down to line 14, we're getting close to the end now. We're almost to Nehemiah 6, right? Down to line 14, it's a twist. The king gave me governorship in year 20. Then he talks about from the 20th year to the 32nd year, he didn't take his governor's allowance. So what he's saying is, in those letters that Artaxerxes wrote, he named Nehemiah governor of Jerusalem. So he went in there like, I'm the new governor. When you're a governor of a place, you have pretty unfettered control right up until the point you rebel. So he was, I'm the governor. I have control. We're building a wall. And then he took over and he said, but while I was in control, I didn't take the allotment of bread and wine that the king had promised me. So are we supposed to think he's a saint for not taking payment when he wasn't loyal? I mean, was he doing the job of governor for the king? No, he wanted to be a king in his own right. That's called hubris. He says he held it for 12 years and that, he didn't use that food for himself. He gave it to all the people that were helping him. He shared it with those who conspired with him. So what's he saying? I'm not greedy. I didn't keep it for myself. But Nehemiah had to eat, right? So what did he eat? Is he saying he ate nothing or just that he didn't keep it all? Did he keep a portion? I'm confused. Did he steal the provisions of the town and not take the amount the king gave him? That's kind of duplicitous, I gotta say. Now, Nehemiah 6:6. I think I'm on 6 right now. Nope, 5. Here we go. I'm now looking at the right tab. So we come to Nehemiah 6. This is what Erica tells us. Remember, I'm doing a great work. I'm building this wall. I can't be bothered hearing how I'm being a traitor. That's what she quoted to us. And remember her idea of building: hammer, sword, hammer, sword. I'm so concerned. So Nehemiah 6:6. Gossam, the Arab. So this is the guy, perhaps of the same genetic makeup as the king, if he's representing that group. And he says that, everybody's talking, everybody who lives here. And they say that you and the Jews are going to rebel, that you're a traitor. Is this Erica's confession? What is Erica saying here? She references her great work. Is she also a traitor to her oath bound, to her familia? Oh, then we hear, what is her familia? Is her familia her children, Charlie? Or is it TPUSA 2.0? I don't know. I'm just asking questions. I can translate the Bible. I speak classical Latin, have been doing it for more than 40 years now. I can only pose questions for the modern era. Nehemiah struck against Persia, modern day Iran. In June, I watched a video, I didn't pull it, I should have maybe, where Charlie championed non-interventionism in Iran. He championed America first. What's in our best interest? Today, we have TPUSA 2.0. Later in Nehemiah, we learn that he sought the royal treasury storehouse, the Gazo Thalakia. Now, I saw that root Gazo, I had to look it up. Gaza, in my dictionary, my 5th edition Cassell's, renders Gaza as the royal treasury of Persia. I kid you not. I looked up etymology of Gaza, and it says we have no idea where that word came from. And yet, 1960, we knew Gaza meant the royal treasury of Persia. Now, that's going to be another video. What is the royal treasury of Persia? But one more word reference before I go. Persica, meaning, when you look it up, the history of Persia. But when you rebracket it, when you look at that formation, it means through or by the dagger. Now, think of that as the dividing point, right? Are you willing to live by the dagger or not live by the dagger? That was the defining characteristic of Western society. We choose to not live by the dagger. We work to welcome in everyone we can, looking for societal constraints against the dagger to invite in even those who may choose to live by it. That's all for today. I got more coming. Hope you'll check me out. Thank you.